Welcome, everybody. This is Hugh Massie, the chairman and founder of DNA Behaviour. And today I'm delighted to be hosting another one of our Identity EQ interviews. And I've got with me for the conversation Tamara Surratt from Legacy Family Office. She's the founder of this business, and we've been working together since 2005. Tamara has been using the DNA systems all through that time and has built a great business. So welcome, Tamara, and it's great to be able to spend some time with you this afternoon.
Absolutely. Thank you for asking me.
That's a pleasure. So just to get started, why don't you tell me something about your life background, career background, and how you got to building this great business, Legacy Family Office?
Well, I mean, we all have a unique journey. And I often say sometimes we take a detour that we think is a detour, but ultimately it ends up later in your career being something that pays off in huge dividends. But my educational background, I have a major in finance and a minor in securities analysis. I went on to get my MBA with a concentration in management, but investments and, financial planning, that was my field of expertise. And I spent all of my career in the financial services industry. The first part of my career was with large financial institutions in their trust and private client group, working with wealthy families. And it was a great experience. I met some wonderful people, but what I started to observe over time were some real significant risk factors for families. And what I mean by that is, when the senior generation would pass, the younger generation, the beneficiaries, would oftentimes flounder and sometimes would collapse, and the family would fall into, fractures and litigation oftentimes, and acrimony. And I said to myself at that point in my career, there has to be something we can do about this. My clients were getting larger and larger in size, and I realized that they had much more comprehensive needs than what was being met at the trust company. And so, 16 years ago, I said, I'm going to go out and build a better mousetrap, and I'm going to deliver these things to my families that I think will help them be healthy, wealthy, thriving families, and not just the quantitative piece of it. Although that's critical, and as a family office, we do everything that you would expect a family office to do, from coordinating investments and their estate plan and taxes and their family philanthropy and their risk management strategies and property management. I mean, we pretty much organize the chaos in complex, wealthy families. But there's so much more to that. And I became keenly aware of the fact that we had a responsibility as advisors to help our families be healthy and to have a successful transition of the wealth to the next generation. So I became really passionate about how do we prepare the next generation for their role and responsibility of wealth ownership. And that's when I met you. So I went on this quest to meet some of the best and the brightest in the world, and you were top of the list. So I'm happy that our paths crossed and that we met at such a unique time. But I will say too, I made a reference earlier to sometimes we take detours in our lives that we think are waste of time, but come back later to be something incredibly valuable. So my undergraduate degree, I served as a research assistant to two PhDs who were doing research on successful and failing financial institutions. Okay, so these are banks, savings and loans. And they took a sample of incredibly successful ones and then analyzed the strengths and struggles and personality traits of the team that led the successful financial institution. And they did the same for the banks that were ultimately taken over by FDIC or FSLIC at the time. And so I'm a finance major. Why would I be doing research on efficacy of leadership teams and as measured by various psychometric instruments, right? This is definitely not anything that I was ever going to use in my life. I needed the job. So I did it. I took the job. And ended up being one of the most meaningful experiences of my life. And it has prepared me well to help families to create effective teams, right? To help them understand their strengths and their struggles and how they can work together and respect the differences versus resenting the differences or failing to understand the differences. So that's kind of what brought me here. And I'm very, very blessed to work with families that are deeply concerned about the potential impact of the dark side of wealth. They're deeply concerned about what the money is going to do to their heirs versus for their heirs. And so it's probably what the most meaningful thing that I can do. Yes, I can save them money on taxes and I can make them money in their investment portfolio and I can do all of those things. Our team can do all of those things. But I think the real satisfying and gratifying piece of it is to see families that are flourishing, they're healthy, they have, respect for one another and they work together as a team and the family thrives versus falling into, fractures and chaos.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful story. And, I always point out to people and stress that, whether you call it a detour or going down a side road or however you want to put it in life, everything's a building block.
I agree.
Something bigger. And at the time you're doing it, you don't necessarily know why. For me, running a human behavior business now, but I was an accountant. But, I see the bigger picture of how all that helps me in the varying things that I do. Because in a way, some of that rational knowledge from accounting helps to bring out more in the human behavior, and vice versa. So I always think these things are useful, and I think that's important for everybody who's listening to this to understand that life's a journey, doesn't go in a straight line.
Right.
Everything's a building block. Take the lessons, and you're going to have if you want to have it, you're going to have your day in the sun at some point. That's maybe doing something really special like you are. But Tamara, what I want to come back to is some of the things that you've been saying about healthy families or unhealthy families, wealth transitions, the children, parents being worried about the children, building effective teams and being able to manage the differences. Underneath all that, and you've done the research, so this is a key pillar in your life journey. What do you think the problem is? And and I think that's probably me asking that question is I think I'm trying to get to your passion with this as well. But there's some underlying problem that you've seen that probably prevails in most situations.
It's absolutely true. And unfortunately, the statistics are quite dire as to the success or failure of most families in transitioning the wealth to the next generation. Roy Williams did a very comprehensive study, and I'm sure you're familiar with the Pricer and the Roy Williams study, which found out that 70% of all wealth transitions fail. And that's regardless of the country that you live in, the tax strategy or tax structure, economic cycle. 70% of the time, the wealth doesn't get where the owner intended for it to go. That's the definition of failure. It's not necessarily that it gets to the children, because the wealth creator may want it to all go to charity. And after they're gone, the kids sue the charity, everybody sues each other. The money doesn't go where the grantor wanted it to go, and that's a failure.
Yeah.
Right. So we know that of those failures, there's very clear reasons why those happen. 60% of the time, it's a breakdown of trust and communication within the family. Failure to communicate. 25% of the time, it's really failure to prepare the heirs. And, financial acumen, helping them understand their role and responsibility as a fiduciary if they're going to be serving as a trustee. Failing to prepare them, and that's on us for not doing our job and not making sure that the family is ready. 10% of the time, it comes from the fact that the family really has no clear mission for the wealth that everybody can get behind and everybody can support. So 5%, if you add all that up, that's 95%. So there's 5% of the time that maybe we didn't do our job. The estate plan, wasn't successful. Tax strategies didn't work. Various other kind of what I would consider professional errors. But 95% of the time, it's really the behaviors of the family that cause transition plans to fail. And this is why 25 years ago, I said to myself, look, 70% of families fail, and that's dire, but you know what? 30% of them succeed.
Yeah.
And 30% of them are doing something right. We need to figure out what they're doing right, and we need to replicate that for our clients. And that's really where, my passion comes from. And there are some very, easy to do behaviors that we can help our clients to adopt that can help them make that transition more successfully.
And do you think with the, if you want to call it the poor family behavior, which is rooted in bad communication,
mm-hmm.
that outworks itself into kids that are entitled and have a lot of expectation? Because to me that, those two E's are very important. That and I think there's a few other E's in there as well, but around kids wanting to be entertained and that type of thing, money spent on them. But there's always, at the end of the day, in my mind, the poor communication in the family leads to mis-expectations. There's usually entitlement in there because of that. Do you think that's the big point in there?
Absolutely. That's what I observe. And I actually am asked to travel throughout the US and Canada to speak on this whole issue of raising empowered heirs versus entitled heirs. And a very good friend of mine, Courtney Pullen, who wrote a fabulous book called Intentional Wealth, and I highly recommend the book, and I know you probably know Courtney well. And so I stole this from him with his permission. He talks about this money relationship continuum, right? And on one side of it, you have total denial, paralysis. This is wealth owners that are afraid. Money is a taboo subject. They never talk about it. They don't want to talk about it with their kids. They pretend they don't have money, and they try and fool their kids into thinking they don't have money. But listen, you got a yacht and you're flying private, and it's kind of obvious that you have resources at your disposal. So on one side of the continuum, you have this denial, this avoidance, right? And many, many wealth owners are there. On the other side of that continuum is entitlement, right? It's that feeling of financial dependence, right? You create these trust fund babies. And sadly, those failure to launch, what we would say, those individuals who fall into that are oftentimes lack self-esteem, and they lack a sense of their own self-worth because they haven't had the luxury of struggle, which helps you build self-esteem and helps you build resilience. And so on one side, you have this whole denial piece where you just don't talk about it. Denial, I tell my clients all the time, denial is not a strategy. So on the other side, you have this sense of entitlement where people don't have spending control, right? They lack drive. They feel like their net worth is tied up, and their self-worth is tied up in their net worth, right? But where you have in the middle, and this is our goal, and this is where healthy families thrive, is this sense of empowerment, right? This sense of responsibility, embracing the responsibility, understanding the responsibility, being grateful for it, showing self-discipline, and where the money supports the life purposes and passions of the individuals in the family versus serving the money. The money becomes that kindling, right? Their passion is the spark. And if we can put those two things together for our families, families tend to do much better.
Yeah, it's sort of a double-edged sword a lot of the time because in a way the money can mask or hide the identity of the heir, and therefore they don't know who they are. They don't even have to bother to go and find out who they are because they've got plenty to spend.
Mm-hmm.
But if they actually had the money taken away and they learned, well, some of it taken away, and they learned to find something that was purposeful and, impactful in the world. And then were given the money, there's so much they could do to advance themselves in the world. But that's the double-edged sword of money, isn't it? So it's.
I have found that over my career, money simply magnifies existing fissures in relationships.
Yeah.
Cracks in the facade, because money has all these emotions tied up into it.
Yeah.
All of the learned behaviors, all of the innate behaviors we have. So money has a lot of emotion tied to it. And it's oftentimes people don't know how to talk about it. And to talk a little bit about DNA behavior,
yeah.
One of the powerful parts of the tool is to really improve self-awareness. So I've used this instrument for 16 years, and I've used it with tons of families. And I'm always amazed at the discovery that happens when people see the report and we debrief and we talk about it. And husbands and wives it starts to make sense why the wife spends all the time and why the husband is paralyzed and he wants to squirrel away every nickel. So those kinds of things can just be magnified if there's not a healthy relationship and a healthy conversation and an understanding of each other's strengths and their struggles. And within the entire family.
And that's why, even when I ran my family office business in Australia, that I got very keen on this process because it was objective and it allowed people to objectively talk about these issues as to who they are, what they wanted to do with the money, what their strengths were, as you said, their struggles as well, without the money being at the center of the conversation for a period of time. In a way, it separated it out for a while and we could get to the root of those issues. And that's why having the objectivity was important. But I also want to ask the question for you as the family wealth manager, if you want to call it that, and advisor. When you completed financial DNA for the first time for yourself 15 or so years ago, how did you feel? What was your reaction when you completed it for yourself?
Well, I've done a lot of these because of my work. I've taken Colby and Myers-Briggs, and I had taken a lot of psychometric instruments to try and help understand myself. So I was pretty self-aware going into it. But it certainly identified my strengths, but it absolutely nailed my struggles. It did. I already knew that, but it just solidified the fact that, I'm a big picture type of person. I'm a visionary. I'm very creative. I love to come up with broad concepts and ideas, but, putting those into, a process is painful for me, right? So, I may juggle too many ideas. So the struggle piece, it was just spot on. It was spot on. And I think what I do also with my families is I run, and your team is fabulous about this, I will plot the entire family on a grid, and I put myself on the grid so they can understand my strengths and my struggles. And I'm very honest about what my struggles are, and helps to manage their expectations, but it also helps them to understand what my preferred communication style is, and for me to understand their preferred communication style. And that's, so for me, the thing that I found the most beneficial about DNA behavior is it really gets to the financial part of your decision-making process, your natural motivations. It also helps identify your natural hardwired behaviors, whether you're extroverted or introverted, and, whether you're detail-oriented or whether you're, broad concepts, and whether you're structured or whether you're flexible and adaptable and changeable. But it also helps to really get to the root of risk tolerance. In other words, your stated risk tolerance and your risk behaviors. And oftentimes they're not in harmony. And people are shocked by that, because you'll see a husband that's 100% on the risk spectrum and the wife that's like 20% on the risk spectrum, and their portfolio is very risky. Well, the wife, those behaviors for her are very uncomfortable, right? So the instrument does a really good job of dissecting and getting beneath the surface when it comes to financial behavior.
Yeah, and so when you're, using the instrument in the process, so also for our audience, you're an engager style, which means very outgoing. You can see that, and you mentioned it already. Your strongest trait really as an engager is being innovative. That's
absolutely.
And you're also very instinctive in the way in which, intuitive in the way you operate. So how have you brought that to bear? To use those talents when you're advising the families.
It's interesting that you raised that, and I took the profile back in 2005, 2006. I retook it last year. And when I took it 16 years ago, I was an influencer. And then recently I moved slightly on the chart to engager. Very, very close. And my my two strongest behavioral factors were the same.
Yeah.
And I think it was a function of age. I'm in a different place in my career than I was 16 years ago. I just started the company. And I feel like most psychometric instruments are pretty good at getting beneath the surface. And those tendencies, those behaviors rarely change dramatically over time. So to your, how have I used my unique style? I think it takes a really a special cocktail of strengths to do what we do.
Yeah.
I am, I'm very extroverted. I'm very much comfortable with people. I'm warm and I'm capable of creating strong partnerships. I have a very, very high empathy score, very incredibly high creativity score. So I'm always thinking about possibilities and ideas, and I'm solutions oriented, right? So clients come to me, they have a problem, they have an issue, they want a solution. So solving problems is probably the biggest thing we do every day. But I think the other thing that has really helped me, and I've used it repeatedly in my career, is the whole spontaneous behavioral factor, right? So I'm very free-flowing, I'm very instinctive, but I'm also adaptable and changeable. And in the financial services industry, if you don't adapt, you die, right? You have to continually be learning, and you also have to be able to adapt to the various behavioral factors and the preferred communication styles of every single client and every single household and every single generation of that family. And that has really helped me in my practice to be able to help clients to, see different perspectives in a respectful way, but also to be willing to think outside the box. And I think probably that's a reason why I started the company, because like I said, the trust company may have seen the problem, but they didn't really want to provide a solution for clients. They weren't solutions oriented. They weren't driven by that. And I really, really was. And so I really needed to go out and I needed to be able to deliver that to clients.
Because I think also one of the things is that's always a challenge when you're working with a family, and you're working with big families, so the financial issues there can be complex, but also the human issues are so complex. And with your style and what you're trying to do, and get to the human behavioral side of the family as well, to get them to be more empowered, address communication, their differences. What I know is that the whole situation can be turned on its head in a nanosecond by one question. And you've got to intuitively know what's going on in the room, how everybody is reacting to it. And I imagine that takes great instincts to do that.
And I do think too, I mean, if you look at the kind of the behavioral biases I have, my risk tolerance, believe it or not, I went out and started this company, you know, mortgaged my house and loaded up all my credit cards, and I started this company. And I tell my friends all the time, if I had known then what I know now, would I have still done it? Probably not. So I'm so glad I didn't know, because this whole journey, I wouldn't have been able to experience this journey. But my risk tolerance is really actually very moderate.
Yeah.
And so I bring that perspective to clients as well, to help moderate those that are on the one side of the spectrum that are completely risk averse versus, you know, a lot of the entrepreneurs who've got 100, you know, in their risk preference score. So I do tend to moderate them in many different ways. So I think that's helpful with clients too. But when I talk about the unique cocktail, for us to help our clients in the way they deserve to be served, requires you to be a good listener, requires you to be empathic. It requires you to be adaptable and think on your feet, and be able to understand perspectives and try and put yourself in their shoes and understand their pain and their suffering, or their fears, or whatever, you know, the case may be. So those are all things that I think have given me that unique cocktail. Do you see you were an accountant? I didn't know that about you. I mean, I find that hysterical, because most CPAs are very structured, and they're very focused on the task, versus having this ability to think outside the box and to plug into some of the more humanistic, emotional pieces of decision making.
That's why Tamara often say to people, I'm a reformed accountant. That's the best way. That's the best way I can put it.
I like that a lot.
But if we took you and said, okay, you're delivering this great service, unique service to these wealthy families,
mm-hmm.
What do you see your identity as? How do the families even portray you as well? Sort of what's the whole, if you really pinpoint it down, what's the hallmark of the service that they're getting out of you? Because it's not just managing the money. There's something deeper going on that you do in helping them deal with their children, empowering their children. I think that, and that possibly relates to what's your opening gambit when a new family comes before you,
mm-hmm.
And how you approach things.
So how would my clients describe me? I mean, I'm their person. I mean, I'm their family office executive, and they pretty much tell everybody, she runs my life. She does everything for me. Her team coordinates our entire financial world, our legal and tax world, and all of those things. But I think if you spoke to any one of my client families, I think what they would tell you is this approach, and I'm certainly not taking credit for this type of holistic embracing of all of the forms of capital of the family, right? Is transformative. It is transformative. It transforms families, and it transforms, generations. And for them, all they can tell you is it has been an amazing journey, because, like I said, there's more than just financial capital in a family. And oftentimes advisors fail to understand that. They fail to see the intellectual capital and the human capital that families possess. Oftentimes that is the greatest source of wealth they have, is this whole human capital piece, right? Financial capital is important, and we can't discount that, right? We still have to manage the wealth, and we still have to help people build financial literacy and understand the legal aspects of the trusts and the complexities of all of their holdings. Yes, we have to do all that. But with that comes such great responsibility. We have to treat the patient, if you will, in every single way. I mean, we have to help them come up with the mechanisms to manage that and cope in whatever their struggles might be, to help minimize their struggles, maximize their strengths, and to be flourishing. And in my opinion, if the social or the intellectual capital and the human capital of the family isn't thriving, then the family isn't really wealthy.
Yeah, so really, and really that's the crux of it at the end of the day, is these families are coming to you because you can empower the human capital of the next generation. That's really, that's what I've been hearing that you're about, and that's what is the power in your service, because there will be somebody else that can manage investments. There's somebody else that can, deal with some of the complex transactions,
and I have those people on my team.
Yeah, but they don't get dealt with well.
I've hired those people.
Yeah, you can hire those people because that's a commodity to some degree. Not meaning that those people, aren't important, but that's they're functional roles. Whereas you've got something special in your ability to empower the human capital in the next generation of the family. Because if that doesn't happen, in a way, the wealth doesn't work.
And I think too, this demographic explosion and change in our country has driven a lot of this over the last 20 years. As baby boomers have aged, the baby boom generation as a whole is much more open than their parents. So, the baby boom generation, when, their parents were Depression era, children, or they were Depression era adults. And their entire approach toward wealth management was very different. And we see this every generation, right? There's generational shifts that take place. And I've been fortunate enough to be in the business long enough that I've seen those shifts take place. And the baby boom generation is now in their 70s, the 60s, 70s, right? And they're thinking about their mortality, and they're thinking about the legacy that they want to leave. And they want to try and figure out a way to do it better than their parents did it. They don't know how, but they want to. And that's part of the reason why I get up every day, because I want to help as many of them as I can to achieve that goal.
So I think you're going to do that. And, even though you've been doing this 15 years now or 16 years, there's still a lot more left in both of us to impact.
I agree.
Many more families. So
we're not done. Yeah, we're not done yet.
So Tamara, as we wrap up this conversation today, is there any tip that you've got for people out there, families, that you'd like to leave behind, or a book they should read, or something they should do, think about?
There are so many great books. And I'm not plugging my website, but I have a resource list on my website, legacyfamilyoffice.com. Go to the website. There's so many great books that are resources that really motivated me and inspired me to get into this. But the one thing I would say to wealth owning families is, and this is the hardest thing that parents can do, and this is a parenting tip, not just for wealthy parents. Don't deprive your children the luxury of struggle. That is a luxury they cannot afford to be robbed of. It's very easy when you can give them the new car and you can give them everything they want. It's easy to just give them money because you can. So when I speak, a lot of times I just say, I want you to think about the fact that they can't develop self-esteem. They can't develop their own identity without some genuine accomplishment.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about accomplishment that gets handed to them. I'm talking about something they've worked for and they've earned. Don't deprive your children and your grandchildren of that luxury.
Because in a way, the best money you earn is the best money you have is the money you earn.
Well,
and it's interesting. I think it's a great message and a great way to end this conversation. And Sarah Blakely. I don't know if you know Sarah, but I know her personally, and also was listening to her talk at an entrepreneurs organization event that, I'm on the board of it, that we had a couple of weeks ago. And she and her husband, who are both successful in their own right, rags to riches stories, both said exactly the same thing.
Okay. Well, like I said,
if robbing your kids of an opportunity, and we would be robbing our kids of an opportunity if we gave them too much money up front and they don't go out there and do something themselves. And
I'll close with one final story. And I talk about this when I speak a lot. I love to rock climb, mountain climbing, right? I mean, when you scale 100-foot mountain straight up and you struggle to find a foothold, to find a handhold, you struggle and you work so hard. You get to the top of that mountain, you pull yourself up and you sit down and you take a look around, and the vista is breathtaking.
Yeah.
As a wealth owner, you could helicopter your kid to the top of that mountain and they would get the same view, but they wouldn't have the same experience.
Yeah. I think that's a great story, and that's a great place to leave the conversation. And I hope lots of families hear that story.
Right, great. Thank you so much for having me. It was great to connect.
It's been great, Tamara.